Okay, Patty, you'll let us know when we're live.
Yeah, Bill, we're live now.
We'll just wait a couple of minutes. Good morning. I'm Bill Ross of Janus Conferences. I'd like to welcome you to our panel discussion this morning. I'll be acting as your moderator today. I'd like to recognize today's General Counsel in Everbridge, our partner and sponsor for this event. We've seen an outpouring of interest in this program for today. Organizations are looking for guidance. It's like the ground is continually shifting under our feet. The landscape is changing on almost a daily basis, especially when you factor in actions by federal government, state, and local. It's impossible to stay on top of it. It's changing so rapidly. Last Thursday, President Biden made an announcement that will impact over 100 million Americans, or 2/3 of the workforce. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration is drafting an emergency rule mandating that all private sector businesses with more than 100 employees require their employees to either get vaccinated or face mandatory weekly testing. Earlier, all executive branch employees and federal contractors were required to be vaccinated with no exceptions. The vaccination requirement that applies in healthcare workers who treat patients on Medicare and Medicaid in nursing homes has now been expanded to other medical facilities, including hospitals and at-home care. As we talk to organizations, both private and public sector today, the key concern is, how do I navigate this minefield? How can I ensure that my organization is not vulnerable to lawsuits, citations, and fines? And how can I minimize the reputational hit of being found in violation? Today, we're going to look at the issues that are being faced and the plans and actions that you can put in place now to protect your organization. The key steps to take now have been developed by our panelists as a result of their work with many clients who are facing the same issues as you are. We're fortunate to have with us today a select panel of top experts in the field to address the key issues impacting organizations as a result of the necessity to return to work and the requirements that have to be put in place. The impact of vaccine and mask mandates and getting employees who have worked at home since the beginning of the pandemic to return to the workplace. We'll look at the key messages that are coming from the experience of these organizations as they attempt to adopt to this new normal. I'd like to introduce our panel for the discussion today on managing the return to the workplace. Jessica Brown is a partner in the Denver office of Gibson Dunn. She practices law in the area of labor and employment, and she's been ranked by Chambers USA for 16 consecutive years as one of America's leading lawyers in this area, and also has been listed consecutively in the best lawyers in America in the practice of labor and employment. Jody Jusky is Assistant General Counsel at Keysight Technologies and previously in-house counsel at the predecessor companies Agilent and HP. Keysight is an especially interesting case. As a federal contractor, they are awaiting additional guidance on vaccine mandate. The mandate that requires all employees working in or in connection with a government contract to be vaccinated. It isn't currently clear whether all of Keysight's U.S. employees will be deemed to be working in connection with government contracts by virtue of being employees at Keysight, or if the lines are going to be more finely drawn. In addition, Keysight is a global company, which is of high interest because they must deal with differing infection rates, health orders, privacy laws, and movement control orders globally. Jody has been involved in the legal considerations surrounding COVID at the corporate level for over a year and a half. She brings the wealth of her experience as in-house counsel to our panel today. Thanks for joining us, Jody.
You're welcome.
Lauren Elliott is a litigation partner in the New York office of Gibson Dunn. Lauren represents clients in a wide range of industries and has extensive experience litigating complex, high-value commercial cases in trial and appellate courts across the country. Welcome, Lauren. Tracy Reinhold is Chief Security Officer at Everbridge. He's responsible for working closely with customers and partners to optimize their organizational approach to managing and responding to critical events. And there is no event more consequential today than how we choose to respond to this pandemic. Tracy has served in executive leadership roles in security and incident management for Fannie Mae, Walmart, and at the FBI. Thanks for joining us, Tracy. So let's get started. We encourage you to ask questions. This is really your session. We want to make this of high value to you. Please use the comment section in the Q&A below the screen, and we'll begin with a series of questions for our panel members. We'll kick off the panel discussion today with the following question. I'm going to ask Jessica to start this one. We've seen a steady increase in employers announcing vaccination requirements for some or all employees. Yet the majority of employers are not requiring vaccination currently. I suspect there are many reasons for this, but let's first address the question of legality, often a question that's of top of mind for people, especially today. Is there any legal impediment at the state or federal level to vaccine mandates? And are we likely, nonetheless, to see a barrage of lawsuits? And should the cost and hassle of these lawsuits be part of a company's decision calculus? Jessica.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks so much for having us today. We look forward to this conversation. To address your question about vaccine mandates and the legality of them, you know, it's interesting. Lauren and I, back in December of last year, developed a playbook for employers in anticipation of Pfizer approving the first vaccine, which it had done in December. And so we hypothesized that vaccine mandates would be lawful as long as they were subject to reasonable accommodations under the ADA and Title VII, so for medical reasons and for religious reasons. And then 2 days later, after we published our playbook for employers, the EEOC came out with its first set of guidance on December 16th and said that, in fact, we were correct and the vaccine mandates would be lawful. At least it was strongly implied. They didn't say it as directly as they then did again in May of this year. But it seems pretty clear by now that employers are entitled to mandate the vaccine as long as they make accommodations for people with medical and religious reasons why they can't be vaccinated. As you know, that hasn't prevented lawsuits from being filed challenging vaccine mandates. One of the biggest challenges is now moot. I think there were quite a few people who believed that perhaps employers couldn't mandate the vaccine because the vaccine had only been authorized for emergency use versus approved by the FDA. We always thought that was a super weak argument, and a federal court in Texas, for example, rejected it, which we definitely predicted that they would, because the EUA statute, the emergency use authorization statute, although it said employees had a choice to accept or refuse the vaccine, it didn't govern the employment relationship. So yes, employees always have a choice whether to accept or refuse the vaccine. Nobody's holding them down and putting needles in their arms. But the employer also has the choice to say, if you're not going to be vaccinated and you don't have a protected reason why you can't be, then you're not entitled to work here. So the vaccine mandates are legal, and the legal challenges so far have not been successful. It doesn't mean they won't be in the future, that some, vaccine viewed or slanted, court would try to find the opposite, but I think we think that's very unlikely, and especially seems unlikely in light of the ETS, the emergency temporary standard that we're now anticipating from OSHA.
Thank you very much. Are there other lawsuits pending? Do we see other lawsuits in the wings that could have an impact on this?
I mean, there will be challenges, of course, to the ETS that is forthcoming from OSHA. There have been other lawsuits pending, but again, I just haven't seen them get traction so far. Some of them have settled. There was a professor at George Mason University who had brought a lawsuit, and they actually worked it out that he didn't end up having to be vaccinated. He was claiming a natural immunity. They ended up accommodating his situation. So again, we haven't seen those lawsuits gain traction, but there certainly will be legal challenges to the forthcoming emergency temporary standard from OSHA. And perhaps the White House task force implementation plan for the executive order that will apply to federal contractors. And I know we'll discuss all of that in a bit more detail.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. Jody, I'd like you to address the next question if you could.
Sure.
Keysight is considered best in class in terms of handling the pandemic. What proactive steps did you take early on to get in front of this and avoid some of the issues that other organizations have faced?
I think my answer might surprise some people, but I think we have a very highly developed and unfortunately well-used crisis management process at Keysight. We have unfortunately had lots of opportunity to use it. Our headquarters are located in Santa Rosa. So we were in the middle of the 2017 wildfires. In fact, our headquarters building was heavily damaged during that wildfire. And so we learned how to manage crisis early on. So we have a crisis management process that involves a global team, regional teams, and then site-based teams. The global team, well, each of the teams, frankly, is made up of a multidisciplinary group of people. It includes HR, it includes management, workplace solutions, so all of our facilities people, communications is a huge piece of this. And we have a medical director who is very much involved in this type of crisis and helping guide us along the way, and helping us make, frankly, decisions that are kind of individualized for Keysight. So while we pay very close attention to the guidance that's coming out, we also have to have somebody who knows our operations and understands the dynamic changing situation that's going on around us. We are also a global employer. And so, frankly, we were very much on top of this, even when it was an issue that was seemingly confined to China, because we have operations in China. In fact, it was interesting. I have a very clear recollection of one Friday, very early in January, as I was leaving our site and ran into our environmental health and safety director, who told me that she had been really busy monitoring the situation in China, where there was this virus that had been transmitted to 18 people, and it was a new virus and nobody knew what it was. And I remember at the time thinking, wow, that's a lot of time spent for 18 people in China, But she very clearly understood the potential that this virus had. And so we had our crisis management team in China already activated, and they were already putting together protocols and approaches to dealing with the pandemic. And so once it became clear that it was a larger global situation, we already had some experience from what had happened in China. And what we ended up doing was very quickly activating our global crisis management team structure. So we were meeting, 2, sometimes 3 times a day early on. That allowed everybody to gather all of the gather information. When we had something we needed to know, we could quickly deploy people to go figure it out, get back together later in the day, understand what the information was, make decisions, and pivot pretty quickly. Having the medical director that involved was really critical, because he generally had information sometimes a week or so before health mandates or health orders would come out. So we were able to kind of get on top of things in advance of the rest of the population. A good example is mask mandates. He was pretty clear that that was coming. And so before it was actually announced, we had ordered masks for all of our on-site workers. and had, additional protocols in place. We had communications written, we had a policy put together. And within 2 days before the health mandate even came out, we were able to get all of that deployed. So it allowed us to be, kind of ahead of the game at all points along the way. And then I guess the last thing I would say is our CEO has always been in every crisis front and center, and he basically sets the priorities for the company. And from day one, he said that our priorities were the health and safety of our employees and their families, keeping the business strong and helping our communities. And so as the crisis management team continued to deal with the ever-changing landscape, it was always marching in that same direction. So we were always able to maintain, our sight on our priorities as a company and continue marching toward those priorities. And frankly, like I said, could kind of pivot on a dime as new information was coming out. And as you'll remember, if you think back to March of 2020, what we knew then and what we were doing then is incredibly different from what we know now and what we're doing now. And so being able to have that team of people gathering information and pivoting quickly, I think really was the key to our success.
Thank you, Jody. Well, it's interesting you talk about having the team in place and the infrastructure. That's one of the advantages of having Tracy here with us, is that the business of Everbridge is really critical event management. So, and I know you had mentioned, Jody, when we had a previous call, where in the fire situation in California, Everbridge is playing a large role in helping to control the situation and make sure that the right resources are put in place. Tracy, would you care to comment on that?
Well, so first of all, Jody, kudos to you and your team. It sounds as if you've done everything absolutely right. One of the things that manifests itself during COVID is the duty of care for employees. And so as we transition to the back to work process, I think one of the things that the pandemic has done is accelerated the acceptance of technology in all fields. It actually accelerated that across the spectrum. So when you think about that and how technology helps us in critical event management, what we used to do manually, we simply cannot keep up with today and the ever-changing technology needs. So the life cycle of technology is about 2 weeks. Right? By the time something is developed and hits the street, 2 weeks later, it's already antiquated. So the idea is to be able to leverage technology from your duty of care. I like to call it duty to care as opposed to duty of care. And I think Jody illustrated that really well when she talked about how the entire organization came together to address this critical event. I have spent a lifetime dealing with critical events, first with the FBI and then in the private sector. I understand the criticality of technology and the leveraging of it. One of the biggest challenges that we have in the pandemic is getting people to understand the viability of technology and the sustainability of operations that is ultimately enhanced by leveraging this type of equipment to help us manage through critical events. So the pandemic is obviously the biggest critical event probably we've all faced in our lifetime. It's especially in duration. If you're looking at 18 months of this, it has completely disrupted the globe as we know it. But what it's also done is shown the resilience of the human race. So our ability to pivot, as Jody mentioned, into new ways of doing business is really what we think about when we think about critical event management. Sometimes what got us here is not going to get us there. So obviously, I'm in the security field. I'm the only non-lawyer on the team. But I will tell you that from a practical perspective, leveraging technology and helping educate your workforce about the potential disruption that a global pandemic poses is critical. Information is key, but too much information actually becomes a disruptor as opposed to an informer. So the aggregation of intelligence without deconfliction actually just creates white noise. It doesn't help. And this is where machine learning and AI really pays huge dividends when you aggregate intelligence from a human perspective. You want to be able to inform your workforce, but you want to be able to inform them of things that matter to them, not things that matter to you as a technology provider. So putting rules into the system such as this return to work, what is our duty of care for employees as we transition back to the office? And do we transition back to the office? Have we proven over the last 18 months that there's a new method of working? And is it sustainable into the future? That doesn't negate our responsibility to look after our employees and to ensure their welfare. So part of that is leveraging technology from a disparate workforce. Some of them are going to be in a facility, some of them are going to be at home, some of them have relocated during the pandemic simply because they want to go to a place that they feel is safer. We still have the responsibility to look after our employees and our duty to care. And that's where technology enables us to do that regardless of where our employees are. If they are working for your company at the time, wherever they are, let's say they're at home, there's still an expectation that they're going to be informed of adverse conditions and risks that impact them because they are working for the company at the same time that they are remote. So I think in that respect, Everbridge, it's not an Everbridge commercial, and I don't mean it to be, but the way that we manage critical events through technology is really changing the way companies address their duty of care for employees. This is going to become even more manifest as we return to office. Wherever we are in the world. And Jody talked about China. We have an office in Beijing as well. And we also learned very early on of the pandemic. And, you know, like I said, kudos to you, Jody, and the team, because what you've done almost mirrors what we did in our facilities globally to ensure that we were able. Bill, probably later we'll talk about how we track those employees from a COVID response capability. How do we ensure the welfare of our employees if there's been an exposure? There's lots of technology that can be used on that, but we'll probably come back and visit with that later.
Great. Well, thank you, Tracy. You know, it's great to have, you know, Jody mentioned the importance of this critical event management team. You've got the support of the CEO, you've got the support of the medical director. And Tracy talked about how technology can help augment that team. It's almost like your team's on steroids. So, you know, it's great to have the combination. Vaccine mandates have been and can be applied in many ways. For example, a company may require that those not vaccinated simply work from home, get tested regularly, or at the extreme be terminated. Is there any advice for companies considering mandates on how to structure the consequences for non-compliance, or really the way of enforcing mandates? Lauren, could you take this one for us?
Sure. Thank you, Bill. And thank you, all of you who are participating in this presentation. This is a topic that Jessica and I have been very interested in. And as Jessica mentioned, we presented on the topic back in December at a time when there was very, very little interest on the part of employers in mandating vaccines. I come from a background of a lawyer who has represented pharmaceutical companies that made childhood vaccines. So when we first presented on the topic, we talked a lot about the importance of herd immunity and why, as a community, it's important to consider requiring vaccination so that we can protect our entire community, not only people who can be vaccinated, but those who are unable to be vaccinated, particularly for medical reasons. But at the time we gave this presentation, there was very little interest on the part of employers in even considering any kind of mandate. As Jessica mentioned, shortly after our presentation, EEOC came out and made it clear that it is legal to mandate. And then, but that didn't really change behaviors that much, or policy. The EEOC made it even clearer that you can terminate employees who refuse to be vaccinated. But even in May, we started seeing a trend toward considering mandates, hybrid mandates. And obviously, we've gotten far along since May with President Biden's announcement last week. But one of the driving forces, I believe, of this progression that we've seen, once everybody understood it was legal, is the fact that we are now dealing with the Delta variant. And we are now seeing for the first time how mutations can cause additional variants to arise, and how certain variants are even more contagious than what we saw originally. And we're also seeing, back in December, we thought that vaccination would be the remedy and the weapon to defeat this problem. But I don't think any of us really expected that we would end up with a population that wasn't more than 70% vaccinated. So where we are today is very different from where we were in December, where we were back in May. And obviously now the president has taken action because of those concerns. Before the president's action, we did start seeing more companies interested in mandating vaccines, and they were doing it in various ways. You had some companies who just said every one of our employees has to be vaccinated. Otherwise, and when I say mandate, I think you have to understand that you always have to allow for accommodations based on medical accommodations or religious accommodations. So if I don't repeat that, that is really just understood, and it's implicit, obviously, whenever we talk about a mandate. But while there were some companies who were willing to mandate completely, you saw a lot of companies who were coming up with a hybrid approach, which was, mandate, but allow, they called it a mandate, but they would also allow testing. And there were also quite a few companies where the workers did not actually have to interface with each other. And the work for home methodology had worked quite well. And those companies were able to say, I'm going to mandate vaccination for anybody who comes on site. And that has continued to work well for those companies because they don't necessarily have to face the question of terminating employees, because a lot of their workers can accomplish the same duties and the same work and projects that they were doing for the past almost a year and a half while working from home. But there are industries that don't allow for employees to work from home because inherent in the work they do, they have to interact with clients, customers, particularly people in the healthcare industry. And that's why we saw mandates come first in the healthcare industry, because there was a concern about healthcare clients. And now, of course, we're seeing a broader mandate that's going to be imposed through an ETS on companies of more than 100 employees. So there will be, there will be options still for the companies that have under 100 employees. And I think you are going to still see a wide range of approaches. I think having the testing option has allowed a lot of employers who are uncomfortable with terminating, even though terminating is legal, to have a way of, in some cases, it's going to be, or it may be, depending on if it holds up in court, a requirement under OSHA. But even for companies who are not subject to the ETS, it may be a way of trying to protect their workforce, but not getting to the question of termination. As Jessica mentioned, we have seen, and we're going to see more terminations occur. And that is going to be the option that a lot of employers feel that they rightfully can exercise, and they will exercise because it's going to be important to them to make sure that the mandates are complied with, by their employees. So things are changing rapidly. I think there's still going to be a lot of companies that have a varied approach. In light of what happened last week, you're going to probably see a more consistent approach with respect to companies of more than 100 employees.
Thank you for that, Lauren. So it looks like it's really a risk management issue. How do I manage the risks? What are the risks? What are the rewards? And so they want to go to people like you to find out, what is the risk here? And how do I manage this? So very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Let's take a look at what are the best practices in defining and seeking verification for exemptions. So I find this kind of fascinating. There's some people who belong to the religion of anti-vaxxers. Can I get a religious exemption if I belong to the religion of anti-vaxxers? Or can I say that, hey, I just don't like the fact that the mask is almost smothering me. Can I get an exemption from wearing a mask because I'm breathing in my carbon dioxide? I feel uncomfortable. Jessica, would you be able to comment on this one for us?
Yes. I mean, this is, going to be a massive issue for employers if they are, in fact, required to mandate the vaccine. I mean, we know for large employers with 100 or more, they are going to have the option not to mandate, in a sense, if they want to, if they're willing to allow for weekly testing. if you don't have a mandate, you really don't have a need to venture into this reasonable accommodation process. It's only when it's required that you need to be able to deal with and address exceptions. It is a little bit unclear. A lot of people, we were talking about this right before the call, I was talking about it with Jody. A lot of people have assumed, and it could turn out to be the case, but assumed that federal contractors are not going to have a testing option when the White House task force that is going to implement the executive order that pertains to federal contractors is issued, and that's expected to occur on September 24th. We had sort of inside information at our firm that it's not 100% clear that there won't be a testing option for federal contractors. The way the White House announced it, it is implied. And so I certainly understand why so many commentators have come out and said federal contractors definitely won't have a testing option. But I think we really can't know that until September 24th or whenever the task force issues the implementation guidance with respect to the executive order that applies to contractors. There are so many unknowns with that one. It was very undetailed, that executive order. So we don't really know for sure if there will be a testing option, but if there is not, and federal contractors, which are many of you, I'm sure, out there listening today, if you don't have a testing option and you have to mandate, then these exceptions for religious and medical reasons are going to become a really big deal for you to have to deal with and contend with. And as you may know, the EEOC thus far, and this is one of the reasons why, as Lauren discussed, so many employers were reluctant early on to mandate and really only went that direction, some of them, when the Delta variant posed such a, significant difficulty to getting back to normal operations. There was a lot of reluctance in the early days to mandate because of the burden of having to deal with reasonable accommodation requests. That was only one reason they were reluctant to mandate, but that was a significant one. And it's still, going to be a significant issue to deal with unless somehow we do get lucky and OSHA or the task force gives employers almost like safe harbors. Like, it'd be great if they could say employers who face reasonable accommodation requests for religious or medical reasons can do the following, versus having to engage, versus what we think is going to occur, which is that the EEOC has said that employers need to engage with each individual, essentially, who makes a request for a reasonable accommodation, engage in that interactive process that's required by law that is incredibly time and labor intensive to arrive at a reasonable accommodation for the employee. So it would be really helpful if we could get guidance that basically said, for example, it is sufficient to test if somebody can't be vaccinated for medical reasons, then you can just require negative test results once a week. If we knew that, that would be easier to deal with than having to look at every individual individually. Do they pose a direct threat to themselves or others in the workplace? Can that direct threat be mitigated through a reasonable accommodation? And then what is that reasonable accommodation? Because the EEOC gives so many examples of possible accommodations, and it's a fact and circumstances specific test to figure that out. The other issue is, I've been doing this for 26 years, employment law, basically, for 26 years at Gibson Dunn the whole time. I've hardly ever had clients ask me about how to deal with religious exemptions until the last 9 months or so. And now we're seeing it all the time. Everybody has gotten religion. And the problem is, you really are limited as employers in what you can do to push back on those requests. If you have objective evidence that gives you a reasonable basis to think that the person is being disingenuous, then you have some limited rights to ask for further proof or documentation. But in general, the EEOC says, believe the employee when they tell you, when they certify on a form, and I do recommend using a form that reminds them political beliefs are not religious beliefs, philosophical views are not religious beliefs. But if they're willing to essentially certify they have a deeply held spiritual commitment that may or may not be part of any organized religion, or that may, the view may be contrary to the tenets of that organized religion, the EEOC has basically said, you accept that. And move right on to the reasonable accommodation discussion. So that is a huge challenge for employers because their options are limited. One semi-gift from Title VII is that employers don't have to accommodate religious exemption requests if they would impose more than a de minimis cost or burden or difficulty on the operations of the employer. So that's a much lower standard than under the ADA, where they have to show significant difficulty, burden, and expense. However, in California, for example, the undue hardship standard for religious exemptions is the same as the ADA, significant difficulty, burden, or expense. That's a very high standard. It's difficult to meet. So one thing companies should be doing now in anticipation of a mandate, if they're federal contractors and it does appear, if it appears that, there won't be a testing option like there is for employers with more than 100 employees, is really getting ready to field these reasonable accommodation requests and have an interactive process, have the documentation of that process to be able to defend those claims that will come when employees are terminated instead of accommodated, as an example. It's going to be tough.
I guess, Jessica, if I'm sitting here and I'm in the place of an HR executive in an organization, one of the things I would reach out and say, hey, could you guys help us set up a model in terms of how we evaluate these exemptions? Because it's very complicated. For one thing, it's going to take a lot of staff to operate this. And I think they're going to need a guidebook, which hasn't been developed yet, in terms of how do I select which accommodations are reasonable, how do I select those which are unreasonable, and how do I mitigate my risk? Is this something that your firm can help our participants do?
We have been doing that, already for those clients of ours who voluntarily have adopted mandates already for some or more segments of their workforce. Not all employers are mandating for their entire workforce, but quite a number now have mandated for some segments of the workforce. So we have been assisting them to figure out how to deal with the, reasonable accommodation requests. This is why I say, what would be the most helpful is if we could have some safe harbors, to say these are reasonable accommodations. Again, it's not how the current law is set up, but that would be a huge gift from OSHA if they could say, yes, you're going to have to mandate if they do decide to say, or from the task force, I guess, for federal contractors, if they say, yes, you are going to have to mandate, but here are some reasonable accommodations that you can rely on as a safe harbor, that would be incredibly helpful. But otherwise, the labor intensive aspects of this could be kind of overwhelming. And that is why, we also are seeing early indications that a lot of large employers do not intend to issue a mandate. They could mandate, and I think they could mandate and not allow a testing option if they chose to, because usually OSHA guidance is a floor, not a ceiling in terms of safety requirements. But I think they're going to want to have that testing option that, large employers are going to be granted, because that takes you out of the mandate. That takes you out of having to deal with all of these reasonable accommodation requests, because you can say, all right, if you are refusing to be vaccinated, you just have to test weekly, and so be it. We're done. I mean, I made that sound really simple. The testing option is not simple either, I'm sure, but it does avoid having to deal with all these reasonable accommodation requests, and especially all these religious exceptions that we're seeing.
Jessica, can I ask you a question? I'm going to get a little free legal advice here from one of my favorite attorneys. Do you have any inside information about what it means to work in connection with a federal contract? Because the concern we have, we've got a massive organization. We've got some segments that are quite clearly working with government contracts or on government contracts, but we have a whole slew of others that are sort of on the periphery. It's not that they're working directly on those contracts, but they are in some ways connected. So one of the things that we're trying to figure out is how far does this mandate go? If we assume that as a federal contractor, and again, Keysight is a large company, so we're going to be covered one way or the other. But as a large company, it could get pretty time consuming, frankly, just to parse out who's covered by which portion of, by which mandate. So any advice on that?
We've already gotten questions similar to that, Jody. And unfortunately, as you probably predicted, the answer is we don't know yet. Because again, that executive order that applies to the federal contractors is very sparse on details. And it essentially just says, you will comply with what the task force tells you is the standard. Right. But, to the question, can companies limit the federal contractor requirements to only those segments of the business with federal contracts? We've said the executive order regarding federal contractors says it applies to contractors and subcontractors in any workplace location in which an individual is working on or in connection with a federal government contract. And the task force, you probably know this, Jody, the task force has been directed to define that term, any workplace location, among others, but that's specifically among the terms that it has been directed to define by September 24th. So in 10 days, you'll have a much better idea. In addition, can companies limit the federal contractor requirements to only those employees working on or in connection with federal contracts? I would think probably not, but it is still unclear. The executive order again says it applies to contractors and subcontractors in any workplace location in which an individual is working on or in connection with the contract. I would read that to say, if that condition is satisfied, everybody is subject. But again, the task force has been directed to define that term, any workplace location, and the others in 10 days.
And that's frankly the way that we've been looking at this, obviously in anticipation of further guidance. And frankly, I think from an employer standpoint is probably an easier approach to dealing with this. Although I do have to say I'm very hopeful that your inside information about the possibility of a test out proves to be true, because in addition to the accommodation issues that you've mentioned, the very real issue that you face as an employer is the employee who says, I'm not being vaccinated, not because of a religious reason, not because of a medical condition, but because I choose not to. And that person happens to be the linchpin in your biggest project, the revenue, having revenue at risk. So if we have to now terminate this person because there's no test out option, we are potentially putting at risk in certain circumstances, projects, deliverables, revenue, meeting our commitments. And so, as an employer, for me, that's almost a more disconcerting problem to have to try to solve. How do you deal with those people who aren't asking for an accommodation, who are literally just standing on principle and are people we desperately need in our organization?
Totally. And the labor shortage also plays into it. So you're referring to a key employee, that's a concern, or just having sufficient numbers of employees to keep your business running is also a concern, and is one of the reasons why I mentioned that a lot of large employers are looking at allowing the testing option for their workers who tend to be in the more vaccine hesitant populations. Lauren and I were just discussing this morning, because employers have asked me recently, but before the announcement last week, employers were asking me, can we dock employees' bonuses? Can we issue a mandate, but then not fire them, basically, dock their bonuses, put negative comments into their performance reviews or other penalties such as this in lieu of termination, essentially. And I think they could, but now I'm not so sure, because I think it's a total end run around the OSHA ETS. If you have a minor, what if you dock somebody $5 from their bonus? I think you have to, then enforce the testing option. You have to enforce it. You couldn't say, well, we have a mandate and we're just punishing people, but we're not firing them.
Right. Agreed.
So thank you. Fascinating. Jody, I've got a question for you. You've got these people who don't agree to get vaccinated, don't agree to wear masks. How do you go about disciplining people who are not following the protocols? What do you believe are the necessary accommodations, and what do you think is necessary for organizations to have mandates? As I probably would have said a week ago, I didn't feel that Keysight was one of the organizations that needed a mandate. I really do think that as an organization is, to the extent that you have the option not to have a mandate, that may not be an issue for us any longer. But to the extent that you have that option, I think one of the things you really have to take a look at is your population, and really what is the business justification for a mandate, and kind of weigh that business justification against the risk. So if you're in an organization, if you're a company that is a retail company, if you are customer facing, if you're high touch,
and you're interfacing with the public a lot, a mandate may make a lot of sense, because the possibility that you've got somebody who is infected with the virus, who transmits the virus to others, can create not only a health and safety risk for your population, but obviously an impact of potential revenue and business disruption. And so it may make sense to have a mandate under those circumstances. At Keysight, we have a certain segment of our population that is absolutely required to be on site in order for work to get done. But more than half of us have been working from home pretty successfully for the last 18 months. And so a mandate in a company like Keysight gets really difficult, because you have to figure out, what is the business justification for mandating vaccines for people who are sitting at home and haven't seen a colleague in 18 months? And even to the extent that you create a mandate for folks who are working on site, Keysight has had a set of safety protocols in place for 18 months. When we were all sent home in March, we spent the first 3 weeks really figuring out how to get people back to work, because we were considered essential services as a government contractor, but how to get people back to work and back to work safety, and working with our medical director and others. We very early on were masking. We had one-way hallways. We reconfigured sites so that we were maintaining 6 feet of distance. We used the spaces that the work from home employees used to work in to put production operations in there so we could maintain physical distance. And really over the course of the last 18 months, we've only had a very small handful of on-site transmissions. And those were because safety protocols were not being followed. So for us, a mandate kind of didn't make sense. We had protocols that worked. It really wouldn't apply to the entire population. And so we ultimately decided that we were going to continue doing what we were doing. Now, your second part of your question, Bill, was around discipline. And we have, in fact, had to discipline folks who were not following our safety protocols. We very early on put in place what we called COVID monitors, which I think in retrospect was perhaps not the best name. It reminded me a little bit of those, hall monitors in middle school where, they're kind of spying on you and reporting back to the principal. What the COVID monitors were really intended to do was kind of help with change management. People weren't used to wearing masks. People weren't used to standing 6 feet apart and walking one way down a hallway. And so they were kind of there to remind people and kind of help make sure that the protocols became ingrained in the population. We fully expected that we were going to have, people who made mistakes. This was going to take some time to get used to. Masks slipping below your nose, forgetting to put on your mask, going the wrong way down a hallway. And so initially we really just counseled people and reminded them about the protocols and what was in place. There were some people who were habitual, forgetful, folks when it came to following the protocols. And in those cases, we would even issue a warning, what we would call a misconduct advisory in our world, which basically says, these safety protocols are in fact, critical. Violation of the safety protocols can be considered misconduct. You've violated them a few too many times, and future violations could result in termination. And then on occasion, we had a handful of people who were literally just belligerent and refused to comply. And we went through our usual, frankly, misconduct process. We would interview the individual, talk to witnesses, kind of figure out what was going on. And at the crux of it, it was really intent. And when it became pretty clear that there were certain people who knowingly and continuously were violating our safety protocols, they were putting others at risk. And that was something we couldn't allow to happen. And so we have terminated a handful of people along the way. Making sure that we went through our usual process in terms of evaluating that, I think was really critical, making sure that those processes were well documented. So making sure we understood the violation, interviewed managers, interviewed the individual, gave the individual an opportunity, in fact, to ask for an accommodation if that was what was going to come up along the way, and evaluate that, I think has generally kept us in a pretty safe space in terms of the few terminations we've had to experience.
Thank you for that, because that's really the big issue now. How do I discipline these people? What are the consequences? often unless there are consequences, there'll be no change in action. So it's very interesting to hear your approach. Thank you for that.
Sure. And it is interesting that in the organizations where we've had to terminate people who were blatantly violating the safety protocols, those safety protocols are being followed to the letter at this point. So, to your point about if you just continue warning people but take no further action, people ultimately realize that you're kind of all bark and no bite. And occasionally you kind of have to bite.
Right. Thank you. We know that Black and Hispanic populations have lower vaccination rates than their white counterparts, and their vaccine history may be rooted in concerns not fully appreciated by majority populations. Do vaccine mandates need to be reviewed from a multicultural lens, and are there differing impact considerations to take into account? Lauren, would you please take this one for us?
Sure, Bill. And there are two parts to that question. I do think it's important to understand why certain groups are hesitant about vaccines. And you have to really understand your workforce to do that. And as Jessica mentioned, some companies are imposing partial mandates because they're very concerned about certain types of employees in certain types of jobs who maybe have greater representations of certain minority groups are hesitant about vaccines. And they don't want to lose those employees for various reasons. One may be they may be super exceptional employees who are integral to their organization. And there's also the possibility that, a lot of these companies are facing work shortages. So I do think you have to understand where the hesitancy comes from. I know as a pro-vaccine person, I have to step back and recognize that, some of my experiences are very different from the experiences others have had historically, which might make them very distrustful of government intervention or the imposition of vaccination. So I always think it's important to understand your workforces and to understand their issues and why they are hesitant about vaccines. One thing employers can do, and I think this is important whether they mandate or not, is to strongly encourage vaccination by bringing people from the community in who have a medical background or not necessarily from the government and are representative of these demographic groups to provide that comfort. So yes, I believe that is sort of the least everybody should do for purposes of understanding the impact that a requirement like that might have on certain populations, because everybody wants to be sensitive to concerns of their workforce, regardless of the basis of those concerns. From a legal standpoint, when the EEOC came out back in May, reinforcing that you can terminate individuals who fail to comply with a vaccine mandate. They actually cautioned employers that you have to be sensitive to the fact that a mandate might have a disparate impact on certain employees. And they said employers should keep in mind that because some individuals of demographic groups may face greater barriers to receiving a COVID-19 vaccination than others, some employees may be more likely to be negatively impacted by a vaccination requirement. So the EEOC was thinking about this issue when they issued its guidance back in May. So I think there is an understanding that a vaccine mandate may have a disparate impact on certain groups. The question then is, does that constitute a disparate impact discrimination claim? And I have really not seen those type of claims become more prevalent over the last few months. I think partly that's because you're still not seeing complete mandates. And if the government goes forward with the ETS, you're still not going to have a complete mandate, at least for most employers of over 100 individuals. And that as long as you have that testing option, you're not going to be able to, or individuals are not going to be able to satisfy the components of a disparate impact discrimination claim, which requires, and I don't want to get this, mince any of the words, but in order to establish that the disparate impact discrimination claim, then you have to show that the policy is not job related or consistent with business necessity, or there is a less discriminatory alternative available. I think for the most part, companies feel pretty confident that a vaccine mandate is job related and can be consistent with the business necessity if they want to impose it. There is right now a less discriminatory option available for many companies because they can allow testing as an option. So I think that is going to be a way that companies are going to avoid even having to worry about a potential legal claim. Because you have to remember, disparate impact has nothing to do with whether there is a motivation to cause a disparate impact. It's whether the result is a disparate impact. And I suspect that's one of the things the government was thinking about when it decided to allow most companies of over 100 employees to permit employees to avoid vaccination and be tested. So just to sort of sum up, I do believe that everybody should be sensitive to those concerns, but I don't think it's going to be a big legal issue for employers going forward.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Hey, just a thought, something that Lauren brought up about cultural relevance. And I think that applies to it, right? So if we were looking at a cyber risk, for example, we would do the basic blocking and tackling. You'd install antivirus software, you do your patching, you do information security training for your employees. So if a company comes out and says, let's just say for argument's sake that there is the testing option, part of the adoption process of that is going to be how the company postures itself in the issuance of this edict. So if a company says, hey, look, we really care about our employees, and this is what our options are, and it comes from your CEO or the board of directors down, there's a top-down and a bottom-up approach. You get some champions within the organization that understand the criticality of protecting our workforce. At the same time that you've got executive leadership saying that this is something that we're going to do. I think that it has to do with risk tolerance and risk acceptance in a company. But in order for us to be successful in this, culturally, the organization has to be able to articulate the benefits of this from a company perspective. We're always going to have challenges with folks that don't participate or don't want to participate. It will become less obvious. And the reason I say that is adoption of things. For example, employees very rarely like to adopt into mobile applications on phones because they feel like they're going to get tracked by their employer. That seems to go away when your desk mate gets a warning that there's a tornado coming and you didn't get it. So they see the benefit of it. It's really simple and it sounds ridiculous, but it is incredibly effective. So if your peer pressure is one thing, if you have an organization like ours, and Jody talked about the difference between government contracts. Almost all government contractors have more than 100 employees, so they're going to get covered one way or the other. Right? But adoption within the organization is more of a cultural thing than it is a mandate, because people will leave if they don't feel that it's necessary or that leadership doesn't believe that this is important for the organization. And I think sending that message from a practical standpoint is critical for the adoption of the duty to care for your employees. And I think you phrase it that way. We care about our employees. We care about what we do. Our employees are like family, and we want to make sure that our families are protected. We consider ourselves at Everbridge the Bridger family, right? You're a Bridger. So we care about each other, and part of that caring is demonstrating the necessity to put in protective actions that protect our family during times of crisis. And I think between mask mandates, the vaccination, and testing, I think if those three options are on the table for employers, that it gives them a viable route to protect their organizations as they go forward. Not to say that it's not going to be without contention, because it will be, but I think it's something that can be messaged through leadership, corporate communications, and other parts of the leadership team that help to dispel the myths, rumors, and misinformation that's associated with the coronavirus and the Delta variant.
I have a client
That's a good point, I think.
I have a client taking that concept even further, Tracy, in a way. I would say they're about to announce, that leadership thinks this is really important. Your health and safety matters to the organization, et cetera, et cetera. They have a somewhat vaccine hesitant population. And so they are rolling out incentives at a time when, I think they see their employees are probably going to see the writing on the wall that mandates are coming, or at least weekly testing, if not the mandates. So they're offering very significant incentives to their employees to be vaccinated by certain dates that are coming up. So if they're fully vaccinated, I think this might be about right, but I can't remember the exact dates. Say if you're fully vaccinated by October 15th, you get $1,000. If you're fully vaccinated by November 1st, $500. Something to say, like, we care about this, we care about you. We want you to get vaccinated. We're not requiring it, but we are incentivizing it. And so, here's how this program will work. So I think there are a lot of creative things that employers can do to try to convey that message that you were describing.
So Jessica, we actually considered doing something like that, but one of the reasons we were hesitant was the issue of the legal exemptions. So how do you deal with, in the case where you're providing incentives, how do you deal with the fact that there are these groups that have legal entitlement to opt out, but therefore would not end up being entitled to the incentive? So we were a little bit concerned about how you manage that situation.
Yeah. I think other employers have been too, but a number of other employers that have announced incentives in the past have dealt with that issue by offering alternative ways to earn the incentives. So for those employees who can show they have an actual legal basis for not being able to be vaccinated, grocery stores that had announced $100 incentives, for example, in the past, have allowed those workers to watch a safety video or take a safety training course around COVID-19 issues in order to earn the incentive. So I don't think there's a clear legal requirement that you have to offer an alternative means to earn the incentive, but I definitely think it reduces the risk of potential discrimination claims on that basis. And so I think it's advisable to offer that.
Okay, that helps.
It's also
Thanks.
incredibly inclusive, right? So inclusive-ness is key. You're not excluding a segment of the population based on religious beliefs. And I think that's huge. I mean, it becomes a team effort. Aside from the legal challenges that you guys are well equipped to address, from a cultural perspective, it's important for the company. It's important for the company, and it's important for company retention as well. Eventually, we will resolve this critical event and we will be on to something else. And people have very long memories when it comes to how they were treated by their employers when it comes time to think about retention or jumping to a new opportunity.
And all of that is even more complicated in this work from home era. I know a lot of companies are struggling to maintain that sense of camaraderie, loyalty, to generate loyalty from employees, because it's, so difficult, or can be, when you're not seeing each other on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. This has been a great discussion. I think we've got about 30 minutes left. I'd like to move into the chat if we could, and some of the questions from the audience. One of them is regarding testing. Is the employer required to pay for the test, or can this be passed on to the employee?
Yes, that is a big question. And I think, we've just done a little bit of looking into this issue so far, because we kind of expect that OSHA will address this issue when it issues the ETS in a few weeks' time. And so we do kind of expect they'll address that issue. As you probably know, so far, we know that OSHA intends to require employers to pay for employees to be vaccinated, including their time, their time spent getting vaccinated. They have to pay employers for that, or employees for that, but they have not told us who bears the cost of testing. And so I think they haven't decided it, but they will obviously have to, or likely will have to, and then tell us. However, under current law, what we had been advising employers previously was that it does not appear that it's clearly required by federal law, but there are a lot of state laws that arguably require employers to pay. California has an explicit requirement, I think, on this, where employers definitely have to pay for the testing and the time spent getting tested. If it's an employer requirement in any way, shape, or form. But other states just have requirements that that employees are to be reimbursed for business-related expenses. So I think there are a lot of state laws on the books that employees could invoke to say that they are entitled to be reimbursed for the cost of testing, which makes it, I think, a risky area to try to shift those costs to the employees. unless, the White House or OSHA really comes out and says that employers are able to do that. I've noticed, that in the announcement recently, President Biden emphasized the fact that the White House has been working with very large retailers, including Amazon and Walmart and others, to make tests available at cost. So it's obviously important that, the tests are very plentiful and that they are affordable. I don't know if they're doing that, though, with the idea that the employers could shift the cost to employees, or they're just trying to keep the costs lower for the employers because they're going to be very significant for those employers who offer a testing option if they're not allowed to have the employees pay. So I think it's a big open question right now, and a difficult question, and one that employers are eagerly awaiting further guidance regarding. Any thoughts on that one, though, Joe? I saw you were nodding.
Yeah, I would not be taking the risk of shifting that burden to employees. As a California employer, obviously in California, we have no option. Oftentimes, frankly, for ease of administration, unless there's a real legal reason not to, we kind of use a lowest common denominator approach to things like this. So if we're going to pay for it in California, we would pay for it elsewhere. But I think even outside of California, to your point, anytime we have a job that requires medical surveillance, so if we have people doing soldering on a production line and they have to periodically be monitored for lead, we pay for that testing. We pay for the time that it takes to do that testing. I think if we're going to put in place a mandate with testing as an option, I think that while there can be some distinctions made, I think that the distinctions are pretty fine distinctions, and I would probably not want to take that risk.
Yeah. The one reason I could see OSHA potentially shifting the cost to the employee, although I think it's probably unlikely, but it would incentivize people then to get vaccinated, I think. And that might be a desired outcome. If employees knew they were facing the cost of weekly testing, some of them at least would just say, forget it, I'm just going to be vaccinated and have it over with. So that would be one rationale for doing that. But I think the current administration would be reluctant to impose those costs on employees.
And by the way, if the costs are shifted to the employees by OSHA or by the task force, we'll go with that. But in absence of any clear guidance as to who pays, we would likely be the ones to pay.
And by the way, I said, under federal law, it's unclear, but I think EEOC has come out and said that at least if the testing is required for the purpose of determining a reasonable accommodation, then employers absolutely have to pay. So, sure. I think, wait for further guidance on this, but otherwise probably prepare to pay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much for that. Here's another one from our audience. Does the mandate presuppose that the company is expecting or requiring everyone to RTO? Otherwise, what is the employer's interest in mandating vaccine if folks aren't in the same physical offices? Therefore, without a required RTO for all, what is the point?
I mean, that is definitely one of the questions that that we're waiting to have answered by the ETS or the further guidance from the task force. One of the big open questions is, will this apply to remote workers? Because, arguably there is no reason to have them vaccinated and tested. However, I have dealt with this issue for employers who have voluntarily adopted a mandate to keep their workforce safe. And some of them have made the requirement apply to remote workers where there was a business justification for doing so, such as, yes, you work remote 90% of the time, but we do have you come to the office for meetings sometimes, or you do interface with customers sometimes, or, things like that. So, I think there could be business justifications for having the mandate apply to remote workers. It's harder to justify, but we do expect OSHA and the task force probably to elucidate the answer to that question.
I think it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg situation too, though, because frankly, if you don't apply the mandate to everybody, I'm not sure how you get everybody back into the office. So, if the goal is to return everybody to the office and you've got a segment of the population that's at home unvaccinated, those people probably cannot return. And yet it doesn't, to your point, it's harder to create a business justification for people who are currently successfully working from home to say that they are required to take the vaccine at this point. So, as I said, it's not, I think it's very unclear. And I think if an employer really wants to create a mandate for work from home employees, I would suggest that part of that mandate and part of the business justification for it has to be focused on maintaining the company culture, allowing for collaboration that is really lost or at least greatly diminished when you've got a big segment of your population working from home. So I think that needs to be a part of the justification. Otherwise, it gets really hard to tell people who are sitting safely at home that they have to take the vaccine in order to protect the employer.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear if you're going to tell people you will be back in the office in the future. We've been allowing you to work from home as a sort of a, modification because of the pandemic, but you're coming back. Pretty simple for people, though, who are in more permanent remote situations.
Agreed.
Yeah, that's the distinction I was drawing initially.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Here's another one from the audience. Will the ETS allow testing as an alternative to the vaccine mandate? What's your view? Do you think it will?
The OSHA ETS for large employers has said that it will. So that's pretty clear. That's pretty clear. Now, it's less clear, as we've talked about earlier in this segment, whether that will be an alternative for the federal contractors. And the White House announcement implied it won't be, but I don't think we know that for sure. That's what we were talking about a little bit earlier.
Okay. Here's another one. How do you best communicate employee confidentiality of vaccine status in the light of mandates and in comparison to HIPAA, which is confused often by the general public? So looking at confidentiality, privacy, how do we protect that in terms of employees being vaccinated?
So I can jump in, but maybe Jessica wants to also chime in. One of the things
you a chance, Lauren, because I keep remembering it. No, I was thinking this is a perfect question for you to field, Lauren, and I apologize for answering so many of the questions so far. Go ahead, please.
No, feel free. You can chime in based on your experience as well. But I can tell you what our firm has done and some of our clients have done, which has been to have HR handle very separately the vaccination status of people. You have to remember it's a medical record. So you want to handle your medical records in a way that are HIPAA compliant and that you don't run into any type of privacy concerns. And it's very, very important to make sure that that information is kept separate from performance reviews or other type of documentation that maybe a manager might have access to. Because you never want to run into a situation where somebody can claim that either they were terminated or treated differently based on their vaccination status. So confidentiality is very important. I think Jessica can give you more specific examples, but from what I've seen is that information is kept separate for a variety of purposes, not only from a confidentiality standpoint, but just to avoid any problems in the future where somebody might claim some type of disparate treatment based on their status.
Totally agree. Would just add, the EEOC came out and said it's not a medical inquiry or exam to ask somebody if they've been vaccinated. So collecting vaccine status information is allowed. But at the same time, they said, but it is a medical record. It is personal health information. You do need to keep it separate from the personnel file, as Lauren mentioned. You do need to keep it safe and secure. You do need to limit dissemination of that information on a need-to-know basis. And we've been working, Lauren and I both have been working very closely with our privacy colleagues on these issues, because in addition to the ADA concerns and the GINA concerns, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act concerns, which applies to family members' health information, which can sometimes be implicated by questions relating to the vaccines, you just have regular old privacy data privacy concerns, especially in California, of course, although Colorado now has adopting a law that is sort of similar, hasn't gone into effect, same with Virginia. So, and then there's just common law privacy issues too. So we've been working closely with our privacy colleagues to ensure the proper notice and consent forms go out relating to these issues. And I'll be hopeful again, but not holding my breath, but hopeful that we'll get some further guidance on how employers are to deal with these issues when we see the ETS and the implementation plan from the task force.
Great, thank you. Here's an interesting one. Is it acceptable for an employer to, at the outset, not based on skepticism regarding the sincerity of belief, to ask the employer to describe their religious beliefs?
Yes, describe the religious beliefs. That should be acceptable. But to go much further would be risky. So again, I recommend that employers utilize a form for any accommodation requests, whether it's religious or medical, and that the form for the religious accommodation request remind employees that philosophical, political, personal views are not the same thing as religious views, and then have them describe the basis for their religious exemption, the reason why they cannot take the vaccine for religious purposes. You are allowed to ask that much, but without objective reasons to doubt the veracity of what the employee is saying, it would be risky to do much more. The other thing is that the EEOC has made clear that, you're not entitled to a letter from the leader of the spiritual, nothing like that. The form the proof can take is really left to the employee's discretion, and there's no particular form that you can mandate. So, where maybe you can say, I need a note from a healthcare provider to somebody who's coming to you about a medical exemption, you can't say, I need your spiritual leader to send a note verifying that you have this belief and that it requires you not to be vaccinated.
Thank you. Here's another one. Is it an essential function of the job? If it's an essential function of the job to interact with fellow workers or clients, can't any accommodation of testing be denied on the basis of the worker posing a direct health risk to others?
Do you want to take this one, Lauren?
Sure. I mean, this goes back to what we were saying before, that the EEOC has made it abundantly clear that you can mandate vaccination. And you don't have to allow for the testing option. And a lot of states have actually enforced that with respect to healthcare workers. The problem with that, I mean, we saw this recently in New York when Governor Cuomo enforced such a mandate. He had in one of the hospitals, I think 200 workers walked out on him. And so there are issues with that, but yes, you can enforce a vaccine mandate. As Jessica mentioned, the ETS sets the lowest possible standard, but you can do more. You can mandate and you don't have to require testing. Testing is there as an option for employers if they want to provide an alternative to provide, a potentially better, safe workplace if they don't want to mandate vaccination for everybody.
And I will say, I have heard employers say that they were doing a lot of testing and it wasn't preventing outbreaks in the workplace. And therefore they wanted to move to a mandate. Again, this was all prior to last week's announcement, but they were just finding that testing wasn't a sufficient measure to protect their workforce. So I think if you're looking at testing as a reasonable accommodation for a disabled employee, for example, it probably will need to be in combination with other safety protocols like masking and social distancing.
Yeah, I mean, you have to remember, testing is one point in time. It doesn't, just because somebody was tested 72 hours earlier and tested negative, it doesn't mean that, 4 days later, the person isn't positive for COVID. So it is a way to provide some comfort, but obviously not the same type of comfort that you get from requiring everybody to be vaccinated. Interestingly, I've actually heard of a company that, in addition to mandating vaccination for all employees, they are also mandating testing because now there is some concern that vaccinated individuals are beginning to test positive for COVID in light of the Delta variant. So you may start seeing a combination of both going on situations. But unfortunately, I think a number of us felt that vaccination in itself would prove to be sufficient, but there's some people who are concerned that that isn't enough. So, it'll be interesting to see if that's something that becomes more popular.
And that is the requirement in Malaysia. That is the requirement in Malaysia. So we've got our population in Malaysia that are having to test vaccinated or not.
Yeah, it's the Swiss cheese analogy. Have you guys all heard the Swiss cheese analogy? Okay, so I really like this. I really like it. It's basically, the idea is, if you have a piece of Swiss cheese, you got a bunch of holes and that virus can get right through them. But if you if you assume like one piece of Swiss cheese is vaccines, and then you put on top of that another piece of Swiss cheese, which is testing, and then you put on top of that another Swiss cheese slice, which is masking, and another one, which is social distancing, suddenly those holes are filled, they're plugged. So the idea is that these measures in combination are far safer than any one can be, and that employers, depending on the severity of the virus in their community and the transmission levels and all of that, may have to look at more than one option.
Thank you for that. Another question here is regarding offshore employees. Are they counted?
No.
So do these rules apply to our offshore employees?
No, these are for U.S. workers. I think, Jody, you were about to take this one, though.
No, I was just going to say the same thing. No, they don't. It doesn't.
When you said counted, I wondered, though, also, could they be asking about probably not, but could they be asking, I think another question is, how do you count 100 employees for purposes of getting to that threshold? And that is yet to be determined as well. So it is unclear right now, do contractors count? Do foreign workers count? Do part-time workers count towards that 100 employee threshold? And I do expect that we will get further guidance from the government about that.
That was the question. It was relating to the 100 employee threshold.
Okay.
Do we have any sense of when employers will institute this mandate? Will it be as soon as OSHA regulations come out? Will it be the beginning of the year? Question regarding timing.
Again, I think it's unknown. There will be some time, of course, between the time that OSHA announces the ETS and the time that it has to be implemented. There will be some time for that. And there will be legal challenges. And it's possible, very possible, I think, that there will be a stay of the implementation date. I don't think people should be banking on that, but I definitely think it's a distinct possibility. However, because it is an ETS, I would also expect that the implementation date would not be very far in the future, because an ETS is only effective basically for 6 months. And then, after that, I think you have to go through the normal rulemaking process. So the whole idea behind an ETS is that it is an emergency temporary standard. If you have a lot of lead time to implement it, that sort of undermines the utility of an ETS.
But you obviously need to allow for people to be vaccinated. And there's obviously, at least, for some vaccines, there's a 3-week gap, and then you have to wait another 2 weeks. For the Moderna, it's a 4-week gap. So I think no matter what, there is going to be some type of time lag, but I agree with Jessica, it's not going to be a matter of, 6 months. Otherwise, it undermines the whole purpose behind the ETS.
Here's an interesting one. What is the liability to a company after it issues a COVID-19 mandate and the employer alleges a negative medical effect from the vaccine? Is the employer liable at all?
I think what we're hearing is that's going to be covered by workers' compensation law. If you have a mandate of vaccination and you're requiring all of your employees as part of their job to be vaccinated, then side effects from that vaccine will be covered by the workers' compensation laws. I think President Biden actually addressed it and said that paid time off will be provided under his executive order for anybody who has side effects from the vaccine. I mean, fortunately, these are not vaccines that have caused really extensive side effects, other than most commonly effects that are probably limited to 2 to 3 days at its worst. So hopefully that won't be much of an issue. But in these situations, in connection with other vaccines, generally speaking, workers' compensation laws should cover any type of side effect if they cause any type of damage.
And Lauren, just following on to your comment about the time off, I believe that I read that the time off, that the employer is required to provide time off, but it can be in the form of paid time off that's already available to the employee. So we don't have to provide additional days. It can be vacation days, or we have flexible time off that can be used for any purpose. So it can be our flexible time off that can be used for that purpose, but we have to allow it to be used for that purpose.
I'm actually hearing that's one of the likely legal bases to challenge the OSHA ETS, because, and I don't know that it will prevail or be a successful basis for challenge, but OSHA doesn't normally regulate wage and hour. Yet, evidently, they're going to be requiring employees to pay employees for their time getting vaccinated, as well as their time recovering from side effects from the vaccine. So we may see some legal challenges on that basis.
Great. Well, this has been a great discussion. We'll take one last one. Do we expect booster shots to fall under the same regulations and mandates? So boosters are coming out in the next few months. I think Pfizer's got one already. What's your opinion on this?
Lauren, did you want to take it?
I don't think I don't think we know, but at this point, I don't believe so. There's a lot of controversy right now about booster shots, and people have strong views both ways. Clearly, booster shots are very important for people who are immunosuppressed or the older population. But I haven't seen anything to suggest, but Jessica may have, that there's going to be a requirement that booster shots be captured, by the vaccine mandate. But you know what? Everything changes. So what we see today may not mean anything 4 weeks from now. That is one thing that has been clear. Or even a week, or even a day from now. Yeah. So very hard to project what's going to happen in the future. But I didn't see anything to suggest that, at least today.
Yeah, Lauren, a year ago, I was sanitizing all of my groceries when they came in the door. So definitely things changed.
I was doing the same thing. And I still have a lot of extra wipes hanging around the house.
I do too. Couldn't get them for a long time. And now I'm
you have a surplus. Yeah.
Yes, I did.
I mean, that is what has made working in this space so interesting, but also challenging, that it literally changes day by day. And so, yes, we can expect a lot of additional changes as employers continue to try to navigate all of these regulations and all of these issues and dealing with employees. And, we're here to help if we can, feel free to reach out to us. That's what we're here for.
And I guess I would have one last piece of advice for employers, and that is, if you don't have a crisis team in place, if you don't have that kind of structure, I'd say put it in place now. It's really hard to build the plane while you're trying to fly it. So it's hugely helpful to have that in place and exercise it and practice it.
And I guess, Tracy, you'd say make sure you have the technology infrastructure for critical event management in place as well to support that team.
Sure, but I think Jody really hit the nail on the head. It's having the team in place and pre-planning before an event. What you do left of boom really affects how you handle things right of boom. So, that proper planning is critical in order to sustain yourself as an organization post-event.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists. I think it's been a great discussion. We can carry on here. We've still got questions in the chat. An hour and a half isn't enough. This is a huge topic. We really appreciate the benefit of your experience and your knowledge in helping us here. I'd especially like to thank today's General Counsel for hosting the event, and especially Everbridge for sponsoring this event at this critical time. It's very important to our country, to our economy, to our companies, organizations. In my lifetime, I can't think of anything that's more important. So thank you so much for participating. It's been a pleasure having our audience here. And we will be doing other events like this because of the importance. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.